So I now have a knife and I'm just going to, I've put a piece of cardboard underneath this white paper uh, and I'm just going to literally cut down the line of the rectangle. And then lift this little rectangle out. The reason I've done this is so that the hole here, which I can hold up to the subject of the three reflective objects, and I can actually look through that hole and select a section of it that I want to paint. Now, if I show you on the piece of work I've got here already, I have a drawing which I started of this subject. And in order to translate it as a painting, I've decided there's too much information, and so I'm bringing the painting down to about this point here, so just above the cup, and bring it in a bit. So this is the section that I have selected out through the little hole in the viewfinder that I've just created. And I have already started on the painting, so I can show you how far I've got, and then I will carry on with the painting and talk about the process that is involved. Okay, so I have this painting, this little area here, which is the section I was just talking about just now, the section I've selected. I would encourage you only to do one shape at a time and its reflections, because there's quite a lot in this. Just in this little cup here with its reflection took me probably about a couple of hours to do that. So I've kept the colour palette simple because I don't want to use too many colours. Essentially it's greys, but there are warm greys and cool greys. So the colours I put out on my palette for using for this exercise were Prussian blue here at the beginning, ultramarine, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. The remainder of the colours I probably won't use at all. I think at one point I probably use a tiny bit of this aureolin yellow. So in order to get started, I would, as usual, dampen the colours by putting some water onto the lumps of pigment that are in my palette. Just wetting them a bit. And then I'm going to aim to do a couple of greys. So I've already started with this one here, which is what I would call a cool grey, and that was created by using this ultramarine blue here, putting some into my palette, and then adding a touch of the burnt sienna, and one gets a grey straight away. Now that's gone too warm, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Prussian blue to it to cool it down. So now I've got a slightly cooler grey. You can see that there. I'm going to show you on a piece of paper so you can actually see what I've got. If it goes too blue, just put some more red back in. Bring it back to the grey. Okay, so the grey I've got at the moment from this mixture of ultramarine, Prussian blue and burnt sienna looks like this. It's quite a cool grey. Now I also like to have a reservoir of warm grey here, So I'm going to continue using the ultramarine, putting some of that in here. I'm going to actually add a bit of burnt sienna, that's too much. You have to be very careful how much of the burnt sienna you use because it affects the colour straight away. And I'm going to also use a tiny bit of this yellow ochre. Now that immediately gives me a warm grey, so I'm going to paint a section of that next to this one so that you can see. So we have here warm grey, cool grey. And obviously I can, having got those two reservoirs of colour, I can, with the warm grey still on my brush, I'm going to put that in the space on my palette next to it and add water to it. By adding water, I'm obviously diluting the strength of the colour. So now if I paint another section underneath it, I've got a very cool, light, well, a light version of that nice warm grey. Just about see it. I'm going to do the same with the cool grey, this one here. Take some of it, put it in the palette next to it, and add water to it. Here we have a very pale, cool grey, little square of pale, cool grey. So those are my basic colours that I'm going to start with. And obviously I can vary the strength of them. I can add more pigment in, or I can pale them down according to what I'm observing in the shapes in front of me. So to get started, I'm going to move my palette to one side so that I have it close to me. And the piece of paper that I try the colours out on will be here as well. So that's next to me there. And I have already, as you can see, established one shape and its reflection. And now I'm beginning to develop the second shape here with its reflections. I can see a sort of warm grey in this top left-hand corner of the hip flask, which you probably can see as well. So I'm going to take some of the warm grey that I mixed up and I'm going to work wet into wet. So with my other brush, which I have here, my other brush, I'm going to put that into water and just lightly dampen the area that I'm going to be painting, which is this one on the front of the flask. And I'm keeping within the lines that I've drawn. I've drawn the thing out in quite considerable detail. I've actually drawn in the reflections that I can see in the shapes, and so I've got a lot of information here. And then I begin to drop that colour into the damp paper so that if I want to soften it out into another colour, I can do so. Use my other brush and I can just soften the colour down at the bottom. Bring it round here with a little brush down the bottom here. So that's the next shape that I'm putting in. And what I can see here underneath is a darker grey. So I'm going to go into the cool grey, which I mixed initially. And I'm going to use that underneath this shape. Now I haven't dampened it, so I will need to dampen it first. So dampening this bottom bit here underneath this next shape that I'll be painting in. see it's flooding as I do it because the paper is wet. That's quite, I think it's okay doing that initially. And then if you want a bit more control, just take the paint off the brush and just drop it into the remainder of the shape. And this is actually continuing across into the one next to it, and you can see the shape below follows this same colour, this one underneath. I'm now going to continue that down into that shape so they look like they belong to each other. So it's gone from warm to cool, but stronger mixture. And if I want to darken this colour underneath here, I can just put another layer of the same colour onto it, which I'll probably do in due course. Now going back to the side of the hip flask here, I can see a couple of dark shapes down the edge here, and I'm just going to put it in with my brush directly onto the dry paper, just because it's very thin and I need to keep some control over what I'm actually painting in those very thin little strips of reflection. And the same here. Now these colours don't just appear in one place, they tend to appear in many places across the shape. So I'm just going to work my way round it, and I will drop the colour in as I observe it and see what takes place. There's a nice little bit up here at the top which has got warm grey in it. I can see it's catching a bit of the light, so I'm going to wash my brush and go into the warm grey, the pale warm grey this time, and just drop that in at the top there. And along this side bit here on the bit where I've already put the water. The other place I can see the same sort of warm grey is on the top here, on the actual, literally on the very top of the flask. So again, I'm going to dampen that surface and drop the same colour in. I've got light grey on the edge here. And a bit of dark underneath. So I'm going to go back into my dark cool one, and I'm going to just carefully introduce a bit of that into the end here. And onto the little bit in the middle there. Now this is almost dry, so I can now drop a bit of dark along the edge here, which I can see. And there's also a bit of dark down the bottom of the lid.